Good morning. I'm Mary Cecola from Ariel Investments, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Ariel. Through my career, I started as a program analyst at college 33 years ago, and I've moved up and through to hold 5 different CIO/CTO positions, as well as gain the opportunity to launch the first financial services firm 100% in the cloud. But those are my accomplishments. And I realize that accomplishments are what you see after people are resilient. They don't really show you what is resilient. I'm here today to talk to you about a resilient career, and I realize I have to talk about the dark parts of my career. My first speech I put together was about all the successes and highlights and lessons learned. That's not resilience. Resilience is the moment between those. Resilience are the moments where you get knocked down, knocked sideways, take a shock, and need to move forward and need to move on. Those high points, they happen after you've gone through resilience and because you've gone through resilience. So I'm going to share with you today some of the darker moments of my career, if you will, but hopefully we're going to highlight the resilience in them and realize that these are the moments when you make those successes happen. I did start by looking up the definition of resilience in the dictionary, and Webster says, a resilient person is capable of withstanding shock without permanent deformation or rupture. Wow. We don't necessarily rupture when we have problems like that at work, but it feels like it sometimes, doesn't it? You've got to be able to pop back and not deform or change because of it, unless you're adjusting. The second definition in there is tending, and I'll throw in not everyone can do this, but tending to recover from or adjust to misfortune or change. So we're going to dive a little deeper into that today. And it reminds me a lot of a motivational speaker I saw early in my career. And he talked about how life often comes at you. And there's good moments. It's like a person in a boxing ring, right? You get your shots in. But honestly, life knocks you down quite a bit. And resilient people, successful people, are the ones who, when they land on that mat in the boxing ring, they shake it off, they push up against the floor and stand back up and say, not today. This is over when I say it's over. I want you to know that doesn't mean you will win in that moment. That item might be over, but you're getting back up because you're going to push forward and continue and be resilient as you attack each one of these points in your career. So getting back to my career, that reminds me of a time I was at a large global bank, and I had reached the point of being a managing director. And that was the top title at that bank, and I was very proud of it. I know these titles are different in all these different organizations, but we get to senior VP, managing or director, and then managing director. And I had my role. One day, my boss, who I liked very much, he had one of those meetings, and he came out and he was no longer my boss, if you know what I mean. And one of my peers got the role to now replace him as the CIO of our organization. And she was not a fan of mine, clearly. So moving forward a little bit, the firm decided that they had too many people at the top of the firm and they needed to reduce that number of senior people. So they looked at the managing directors around the firm and some people they let go. Some people they gave the choice to move back to director. You could say being demoted, and I was one of those people. So they did want me to stay, but they wanted me to give up my managing director title and go back to director. And I could have made the choice to say, no, package me, I will leave. I was pretty upset by this. And my suspicion that the woman who took the role of my new boss didn't like me that much was confirmed. But many people tried to help me. I had people who reached out to the organization, stood up for me, still came down that this was going to happen. And my title was going to go back to director. I had to really think about that. My salary didn't change. My position didn't change. The things I was doing didn't change. I was just now a director, not a managing director. And that's a blow. That's a shock. That's a knockback in your career, right? I did take some good stock of that, and I did agree to it. But what was really tough, besides accepting that I was going backwards, was walking into work the day it got announced, having people come up to me in the hallway, sort of say how sorry they were, look at me with pity in their eyes, or the people that I ran into in the hallway who had a little smile on their face that said, I'm kind of happy you got knocked down a peg. What was kind of sad to me about that is some of those people are people I thought were my friends, the people I thought would stand up for me. But you can see on their face, they were a little happy about that. I think getting up, putting on your armor, going back when something like that happens, when people look at you that way, have your head up. Don't show what's going on inside, even if you don't feel that wonderful. And being brave in the moment is a big part of resiliency, getting back in that ring. I will say I did that. I performed my job very well, did not let it change my approach to things. And 2 years later, after that new boss left and I got another one, I was moved back to managing director, and this time with quite a nice bonus to go with it. I would say that is a great outcome of resiliency. Resiliency was the moment I decided I would hold my head up, go in, and accept that change. So you can see that these stories aren't always happy, but hopefully when you stick with it, you end up with quite a happy ending. Resilient people, they let themselves feel instead of burying those emotions too. I knew in that last story that it wasn't great. I went home and I dealt with it. And that's what let me walk in and hold my head high. Another story I have around that, and really being introspective of your feelings in those moments, is a time where that same global bank decided to go from being regional with its divisions to being global. My boss at the time did get the global CIO position, and everybody under him, there was two, one in the US, one in Europe, sometimes one in Asia, but we weren't as large there. And for my role specifically, the head of asset management, marketing, mutual funds, and sales, there was one in the US and one in Germany. So clearly it came down to the two of us for the role. And we knew we were competing with each other. We went in, we kind of did interviews on it. And I wouldn't be telling you this story when I'm telling you about a career of resilience if I got the role, right? So clearly I did not get it. I did know from my own looking around, research, talking to people that I was the better candidate, at least in my mind. And I was extremely upset by this. You can only imagine. So in the moment I was told, Jurgen's going to get the role, you will be a second in command. You need to not undermine him. You need to make sure that he is successful, and they'd be watching for that. Clearly, this was another setback moment for me. I really did believe I deserved that role and I could do it very well. And I was very upset. I did leave. I left work and I cried. I let my emotions out. And I think I was a little borderline cry for maybe a couple days. And what I realized was there was no way I was going to argue my way through this one. I was going to need to get through this and figure out my next steps. So it took me 3 or 4 days to get myself let the anger get through, let the crying get out. And then I went back to see my boss. And I walked in and I said, I accept your decision. That was hard to say. And he didn't expect to hear that. He knew I wanted to talk to him. I think he knew I was going to come in and complain. But I said, I accept your decision. And I realize it's done. But what I do want to know is why. What made you choose him over me? Because I knew I needed to work on that. He was a little surprised and taken aback by my approach, but he said, Mary, I don't know exactly how to explain it to you, but we're in meetings or in rooms and he says something, I hear him. He says it with authority. I believe he can get it done. I don't hear you that way. I don't hear you saying things that way. It was odd advice. And I kind of stepped back and thought, okay, isn't it your job to listen to me? Why is it my job to be heard? But I didn't say that to him. I said, okay, thank you. I appreciate the advice. And I walked out. Because one thing I've learned in my career is feedback is a gift. It truly is. What I just heard is the way other people see me and not the way I saw myself. I didn't quite know what to do with it. So I did research, kind of talk to people about that. And I learned something called executive presence, the ability to say things with authority, forthright, hold your body a certain way so you are heard in a large group like that. I asked to do some training on that, got some executive presence training, and began using that in meetings. Another big thing I learned through that is when you go into a meeting like that, think of it like a presentation. You are presenting yourself and your topic, and you need to know it and present it that way. And I think it worked because the next divisional CIO position that came up under Sean, he gave to me. And that was a success. But the resilience was the day I didn't get the job. The resilience was how I handled the fact I didn't get the job. And I used it as an educational opportunity to figure out how I can change myself, how other people saw me, and how to move my career forward. And that's why it's so important to dig in after those happen. Figure out your feelings, let them pass through, and then go back and get that information. I also believe resilient people don't believe that life is shiny and happy and perfect and that their career will always move up like this. Resilient people know there's times of setback and that trouble will come, and they're a little bit more prepared for it. I can't say when I started my career I thought that, but you learn along the way that things are going to happen. Management changes happen. Firms get bought and acquired, and things change around you that you can't control. Resilient people have appropriate expectations of that, and they know how to move into it, which means they don't think things are perfect. They don't expect perfection, and they're ready and they're prepared for problems that come at them. When I got the CIO position at the Home Loan Bank of Des Moines, one problem they had was an inability to move projects through. And I inherited a team, and I knew that I was good at getting projects done, and I could help them with this problem. Kind of assumed it was more around project management things, and there were things to fix there. But what I saw was people were afraid of imperfection. They were afraid of having problems and making non-perfect output, which kept them from moving forward. They would have beautiful requirements, they had a beautiful analysis work, and things would fall apart in construction. You call it construction, it could be configuration, it could be coding, something like that. But when you bring it all together, if you spend so much time earlier to make sure you can't have any failures, then you tend to. Because in construction, you're gonna find, oh, someone didn't think about this, or that's what they asked for, but that's not really what they want. You have to be prepared for that. Some people don't like the words plan to fail. What I'll say is plan to throw one away. Plan to have multiple plans and know the risks of what you're going into so you can work around them or have the time to get around them. So there, I started putting up little motivational signs, very Mary Cecola-like, and talking about how perfection was our enemy. We didn't want to have requirements that we could frame and put on the wall. You wanted to finish the product. You wanted to finish the project and have it work for the end user, and that was being perfect. Even the path along the way wasn't. So really worked on the team about perfection's your enemy, get some good requirements, get going with development, get it in front of the user, and use that kind of agile method. Really developing your team to also be resilient is a big part of success as you move up and through your career, and really building that within your team. You can't yell at them the minute there's a problem, and you often have to give a little more time in the project because even if they don't know, that there will be problems along the way. So one thing is just realizing that everything isn't going to be perfect, shiny, happy, plan for, work around it, and move through those problems. It's a huge part of resiliency of you and your organization. This also goes into using new technology, because a lot of people won't use new technology or move to the cloud because they don't know what it's like out there and they're afraid of failure. I mentioned earlier I had the opportunity to do the first born in the cloud financial services company when I was at a private debt firm in Chicago. That cloud first, I didn't expect perfection out of the box. And I knew that as we were taking a road with technology that not everyone knew, or some of it we were doing for the first time, that we were going to have issues and that I needed to support my team through that. again, you can be resilient as a manager, but if you don't build a resilient team under you, you are going to have issues. A good example of this is one of my team members, Danny. He was the one who actually suggested going to the cloud. And we were going to have virtual desktops in the Azure cloud. I don't think that had been done fully yet. And he'd been working on it quite a while. And we ended up in a little place called Alpharetta, Georgia, to launch the first office of 5 that we launched. And a lot of the things were working great, but Danny went to bring up that VDI and it didn't work. And he struggled and struggled with it, and finally came in, and I was sitting in the conference room, and he said, Mary, this isn't going to work. And you could just see his face was fallen. He didn't know what to do. Probably wanted to cry, but he didn't. And was I angry? I was angry. Was I upset that all the preparation he didn't go far enough to know that this was going to happen in the moment? I did feel all that. But I knew none of that was beneficial to us getting the job done. Trying to look at those feelings and say, okay, what feels good to do, which is maybe to get angry, but what do we need to do to get this accomplished? We had 2 weeks. So I just looked at him and I said, okay, Danny, fair, it doesn't work. What other options do we have? What other things can we do? Which made him kind of drop his head, stop thinking about the fact he failed, and started thinking of other options. 2 of the other team guys went in a room with them. They brainstormed. I stayed out. As the CIO, I didn't want to have my head over his shoulder second guessing. Half hour later, they came out with a proposal. And honestly, we moved forward with that. I will say that within a week, we built Citrix VDIs in the Azure cloud. And I don't think anyone at Microsoft or Citrix thought we could do that, but we did it. And we did it because I didn't spend time yelling at Danny. I knew everything was going to be perfect and shiny. I knew we'd hit roadblocks. So I was ready to say, okay, if plan C didn't work, what's plan A, B, or what's plan D? You see, I don't believe anymore in my career that mistakes are mistakes. I believe that there are opportunities to learn and to know what doesn't work. And if you don't make mistakes, you'll never learn what the right path is. You only ever guess. So I think we learn more in our mistakes than we ever learn in our successes. And it's through these mistakes we become successful. That said, I had planned for it. So we made it within the 2 weeks, and we had a very successful rollout of that. One thing I'd like to point out in that story, though, is I was in Alpharetta, Georgia. Even though I wasn't the person hands-on, I was the leader. And I sat in that conference room to support my team and to make sure when those types of things happen, I was there. I was there to lead my team to resiliency, help them through those issues. Actually, right now, I'm in New York with a network rollout. My group's putting in a new network in New York this weekend. And I'm here not because I'm a network engineer, but because when they hit roadblocks, I'm very quick to say, okay, we know it doesn't work. What do we do next? And how can we move forward? I think some people really water down resilience. And they say sort of things like resilient people make mistakes, but they admit them. Well, admitting them is being authentic, and it's only the beginning. If you admit, I made a mistake, and then just kind of drop your hands and you're done, that's not resilient. I think it's honesty, and I feel that the mistake is the first step towards pivoting to moving to the next thing and saying, okay, that didn't work, what'll work next? I think the mistake is not planning for that mistake or planning to fail. I'll use that term again, and a lot of people don't like failure, but planning that one didn't work. You have one to throw away. The ability to make those mistakes and then to turn them into successes, that's resilience. And that's where you need to be truly resilient for both you and your team. That cloud first decision, to be honest, I knew when I got to this private equity firm, they were separating from GE, and they did not want to have any of the technology GE had. They wanted to be brand new. Problem with that is they had an 18-month transition service agreement, which meant for 18 months they could run on GE equipment. At that 18-month, we had to drop and move on to our own. So now I'm building all the infrastructure from the network all the way up through the desktops, all the different endpoints I look around here, phones, AV, And every single application needed to be new. Went from 35 applications to 5. And we weren't just converting to them with a lift and shift. We were going to have to put them in and configure them from scratch with each department. I knew with the applications we were going to have to go cloud because I had to have test regions up before I had a network. And certainly didn't have time to build a data center to do that. So we already knew we were going to put our test regions in the cloud so that we can get going. The different departments could begin configuring, looking, getting requirements, and doing that while we built up the infrastructure to ultimately support that. And one day we're in a conference room talking about that, where we're going to put print servers and the phone system on all these other things. And Danny from the earlier story said, Mary, why don't we just do it all in the cloud? 100% cloud. Now I talk about these down moments in your career, but that was a shock to me. I hadn't considered that. I didn't know anyone had ever done it. And I kind of had one of those little head blown moments. So I said, Danny, I'm not going to say no, because I think resilient people, when they hear a change, a direction, or something different, don't start with no. I asked him to let me think about it. And it was a Friday, so I'm like, give me to Monday, and then we'll talk about it again. And I spent the weekend doing research, and it turned out everything he was talking about moving to cloud had already been done in the cloud. It just, some firms started with the infrastructure, some started with applications, but all those things were possible to do in the cloud, and we chose the Azure cloud. So I came back on Monday and I said, okay, let's get started. But the other thing I did was I planned for the roadblocks. I wrote down the risks. I read stories of other people doing cloud migrations. I talked to Microsoft and my vendors to try to figure out what kinds of things had caught people up before when they did this. And I made a risk list, which I do for major projects. And one thing I knew is everyone says it's not secure. So part of my plan began to hire an information security officer that would work within the cloud and wanted to be technology forward, but be able to secure and had good knowledge to secure everything. And I did. I hired that individual so that we came up with a very secure cloud right out of the gate. I hired people that wanted to do that kind of thing, and I built a culture where they felt that they could try things and fail. And I built it into the project plan. Now, you might ask me, with a 14-month project plan, Mary, how do you build in time to fail? And it was tight. So we had to pivot very quickly when we did have a roadblock, but a lot of them I'd already foreseen and thought of ways that we could move around them. That's what's really important to do, to be resilient and have a resilient team and show resilience through projects. Because when things like that virtual desktop didn't work, and that's only one example, we were ready for it and we were prepared for it. I would also say making the team resilient was really important as part of that project. And the big way to do that is to make sure blame doesn't exist within the team. I did not blame them for things that went wrong. I asked them what they would do to fix it or how to fix it. And I didn't let teammates blame each other. When things weren't working and the tight project timelines and passions got involved, I would very quickly get in there and be like, all right, get in your own corners. Let's take a step back. Let's think about it. And let's think about how things can work, not how things broke. And I work to make them work together. Blame is the opposite of courage. It takes courage to be accountable. To be accountable, you need to ask yourself, is what I'm doing helping or hurting the solution? I often ask them that. Like, guys, is this constructive? Is this going to move us forward? Or we just need to fix the problem that you're both arguing about right now? I really created this culture that when something went wrong, people stopped kind of screaming and pointing fingers. Well, most of them. I still had a couple I couldn't quite get to do it. But they'd quickly go into a room and I'd see them at a whiteboard and they're just trying to knock out the way to change and do it and pivot. I ultimately created a team of leaders because they felt the leadership that I gave them to be non-blaming, to be empowered to make a difference. And they knew they didn't need to run in my office every time something went wrong and make an excuse for it. What they needed to do is get in a room and figure out how to get through it. What I really enjoyed is when they came at the end of the day and they're like, guess what problem we ran into today and what we did to solve it. And that was great. So I also knew that I had a team that was resilient and can continue to move things forward. Building a team like that makes a large difference. And it really makes it so that you are resilient and successful as a leader. I also made sure my team knew that I had their backs. So it's one thing to say within the group that we didn't have a culture of blame, but when you're an organization, the organization might have a culture of blame. And as a CIO, I couldn't control that larger culture. But they knew when things went wrong, I was the one who communicated it, and I didn't point fingers at my own team. When something went wrong, the buck stops with me because we make decisions together, which helped to empower them even more. I can't say that was always good for my career, which may bring us to the subject of interviewing. Because sometimes when things don't go right and you tell people you accept it, if you're not in a culture that accepts people like that, then sometimes things don't work out. And I would say that it's also time for you to decide, should I move on? Am I providing a culture in my firm that my firm doesn't respect or doesn't want that resiliency? If they're expecting perfection the first time out, then they're probably not realistic. So I will move into interviewing. When I left that large international bank, I had reached the top where I'd taken my old boss Sean's position, CIO of Asset Management Division globally. And it was the right time for me to move on. We knew that they were putting it up for sale. I'd been at the same company for 25 years, merged, acquired, all that. And it was really time that I wanted to take a break in my career and look at it differently. But when I did that, I took time to think deeply about the next thing I wanted to do. When you leave a job, pivoting right back into another job that you haven't given time to think about, is that what you really want? What I realized when I left the bank is that I turned into more of a politician than a technologist. And I love technology. I like to get really into it, understand the details. I was more an accountant, worrying about cutting and removing people than I was really driving strategy. And I thought back to my first company, although I said it was 25 years, when I started with Kemper Financial, which was merged and acquired all the way up. And I realized I had a great culture. It really did. It wasn't a huge organization, so you could influence things and really drive change. So I knew that I wanted to go to a mid to small sized company, but I lacked the knowledge of the infrastructure portion, because that was a different division at the bank, and security. So I looked for a firm as I was interviewing, and I took a little while to come up with my resume because I wanted to highlight those things and wanted to look for that opportunity. And I did get it. I talked about being at a federal home loan bank. They needed somebody who could really move projects along. Their infrastructure and security were good. And it gave me an opportunity to use what I knew to help them, but also for me to learn. So what was important in that moment is leaving that position, I took the time to realize what my holes were, what I didn't know. One thing I love about the second time I got that MD title, they put us through a class called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And one big part of that book, it tells you, know your blind spots. I took the time to figure out my blind spots and got a job where I know I could fill them. And it was from there I moved on to this private debt firm that gave me the opportunity to build everything from the scratch. So infrastructure, security, and applications. I can often look at that as my test from when I was learning at that other firm. But that resilience, that knowing my mistakes, knowing where I had to go, and then being able to jump on that next opportunity because I closed those, that's resilience. But I will say, I also knew I think I mentioned to you guys, I've been a CIO, CTO 5 different times. Between those, when I was interviewing and looking for a job, I stayed true to the fact that I knew what I was good at. Even if everything didn't go right in the last job, was being a chief information or chief technology officer. I was good at that. And just because it didn't work out for me, or it worked out for 3 or 4 years and then it was time to move on, that didn't mean I shouldn't do the role again. And I know a lot of people who go through these job transitions and they drop back and they get frustrated because, in more senior roles, you can't control everything. You can't control the business. You can't always control the politics. You can't always control your boss being changed or a management change or a buyout. And I've had a lot of friends drop back and say, I just want to do project management. I know I can manage a project, or I want to drop back from management and be a developer because I know I can control my code and then I'll be fine. But the truth is, that's not being authentic, and it's not being resilient. If you drop back and that makes you happy, and I would say 10% of the people I've seen do it, then maybe you did just do your research and figure out that's what makes you happy. But 90% of the people I know who did it were not happy. They were bored, and they felt the new role was failure, and one they couldn't get out now because they'd accepted that lower position, and they didn't know how they could move back up to a senior position. So when you get knocked down, when you get that shock, when you go through that interview process and maybe the first 5 people turn you down. I had an interview process where they flew me to Germany for a week to interview me, and I still didn't get the job. When that happens, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be in the role you want. It just means interviewing's hard. And you're going to get a lot of no's. It's the time you have to be the most resilient. It's the time you have to stick with it and say, I know what I can be, and I know what I can do. As long as we're talking about resiliency, I do want to talk about interviewing. It's an exercise in resilience, like I said, and it doesn't always go the way you want it to. The last time I was interviewing and looking for a job, I was a finalist almost every single time. And people asked how it was going. I'm like, always the bridesmaid, right? Never the bride. But what began to get to me is that I was consistently losing out. And I always looked up the firm to see what they did hire, to a man. And I started in my own head to think that the problem was I was a woman, and that most people think their senior technical person should be a man. Right then, I did realize that's a defeatist attitude, and it's not resilient, because I just made the problem something I couldn't fix. I can't change being a woman, and I can't change that other people are men. So if I let that be the problem, if I let that stick in my head, I was done. I was knocked down on that canvas, on the floor in the boxing ring, and I wasn't getting back up. So I had to change the dial. That's what I like to call it sometimes. You got to change that dial and change the way I was thinking. So then I said, okay, assuming it's not that I'm a woman, what could I do differently? Made me go back through the way I was talking and doing my speeches, made me go back to the things I was highlighting. I actually sent a note to 4 people who've worked for me that I really trusted. And I asked them, why should I be a CIO? That is a really good thing when you're feeling knocked down to do. I've gotten amazing answers from people, and people I really trust, and sometimes people I knew didn't like me. I asked them that question too. Always surprised people are willing to answer and give me long answers. So when you are feeling down, one way to get back up is reach out to your network and ask them. I got some of the best responses. I changed my interview speech and words and even questions. I asked some people, what are better questions? And after doing that, the second time I was interviewing for a job, I got it. So even though I got knocked back, I decided if I had stuck with that problem being I was a woman, and think about if you're deciding it's not you, but an impossible problem, you got to change that dial. And you got to think, how can I do this? How can I make it better? And if your head gets stuck there, use your network, ask people. You will be blown away how much people want to support you and help you with that kind of thing. So for 33 years, I have been in financial services technology, a male-dominated, well, I'll say both fields are fairly male-dominated. I also told you I consider myself a technologist, which sometimes people don't always see women as real core technologists in this industry. My career hasn't always been easy, and people have tried to push me aside. Some of them I thought were good friends who did that to me, and that was quite painful, to be honest. But others became advocates that I did not expect. People I thought didn't like me or didn't have an opinion. I've gotten opportunities because someone said, oh, Pete said you're really good at this, so we took you. There's more than a few people that were advocates for me than I was unaware. People also talk about mentors in careers. I think advocates are way more important. Problem is, you don't always know who the person is who is an advocate. So I'd say make sure a lot of people know you want that next role if you want it, and don't assume, because you don't know who's going to speak up for you in a room. I've had failures through my career. I've been kind of honest about them with you today. I've been bullied. I've been knocked back. My career has consistently been difficult, but with a lot of success in it. And that's resiliency, the ability to turn that into success. Often through that, I have had to go above the comments, the bullies, the people who weren't happy, and try to build relationships and bridges that I could then use to get whatever I was trying to do accomplished and therefore succeed. So one thing I do want to say is often when it's a relationship, a difficult person, trying to find a way around that just so you can keep your eye on the goal. If the goal is to get the project through, if the goal is to get your strategy through, if the goal is to get the next position and you've got those people, figure out other ways to approach them so that you can move through and be successful. So I think resilience, like I said, it's not in your success moments, it's in your failure moments. Resilience is feeling defeated and you keep going. Being courageous and brave when you walk into that conference room after something happened where everyone knows either you failed or you lost something. Putting on your armor, as I like to call it, and getting in the room. It's with people who stabbed you in the back and still showing up and smiling and shaking their hands. I talked about you have to look at those feelings in order to do it, but being able to do it. Resilience is speaking up and continuing to work to be heard. Resilience is also knowing when it's time to move on. That's not failure. That's knowing this is no longer the place for me. We don't share values. It's okay for me to move on. But most important, it's learning from setbacks and not letting them stop you. Resilience is not shown in your successes. It's shown in your failures. And that's the moment to be resilient. I'm the CTO at Ariel Investments, and I knew I was in the right place when I was going through the interview process with Melody Hobson. And she said to me, you know what, Mary, when you're here at Ariel, you can make a mistake. Be honest about it and move on. Just don't make the same mistake twice. I knew at that time that Ariel is the right place for me because Melody understood resilience. And Ariel understands that to move forward, sometimes you have to learn from something that might be seen as a mistake. I really want to thank you today for listening, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day.